The trypots are boiling. The smell of rendered whale fat hangs so thick you taste it at the back of your throat. And somewhere on that same deck, a man is dying. Not from the sea, not from the cold, not from the storm that nearly had us 3 weeks back. He's dying because he ate. He kept eating, and every bite he swallowed pushed him one step closer to a grave he dug with his own hands. I know how backward that sounds. Stay with me. The free meat the sea handed them, lean fish, lean seabird, scraped seal flesh, killed more men on the long voyages I sailed than any storm I ever rode out. Not because it was poison in the way you think of poison, because they trusted it, because it looked like salvation, because a man with a full belly does not believe he is starving, and by the time his body tells him otherwise, the lie has already done its work. The sea had a cure sitting right there on the same deck. It cost nothing. It required no surgeon, no medicine chest, no merchant's charity. The old hands who knew it lived. The young ones who didn't, who thought lean was clean and fat was waste. They're the ones we left behind. And what I'm about to tell you is what those young men were never told. The fix is something every whaler had within arm's reach on every voyage. Some men threw it over the side to lighten the ship. But before I tell you what it is, let me tell you who I am, and why the men who taught me buried friends over this. I first went to sea before I had the sense to be afraid of it. Spent the better part of my working life on whaling ships out of the northeastern ports, knew the Pacific grounds, the Southern Ocean, the long cold reach toward the Arctic ice edge. The men who shaped me were older than old. They had the look of men who'd been wrung out by something vast and put back together by sheer stubbornness. They didn't talk much. What they knew, they showed you. What they couldn't show you, they pressed into you by keeping you alive long enough to learn it yourself. The knowledge I'm about to hand you is not mine. It was passed down the way all useful things are at sea. Not written in any manual, not taught in any school, not printed in any surgeon's guide. It was pressed into you by watching a man decline, and then, once he was gone, by an older hand who leaned close and said quietly, "Now you know." That was the lesson. That was the whole of the curriculum. I want to tell you about a cook I sailed with on one of my early voyages. An older man, careful with provisions, proud in the way that only a man responsible for feeding 20 others on a long sea passage can be proud. He knew his barrel counts. He knew his ration schedule. He was not careless, and he was not foolish. Late in a voyage, with the salt pork exhausted and the biscuit nearly done, he did what any reasonable man in his position would do. He fished. Lean white cod, hauled up over the rail in numbers that seemed like providence. He cleaned them himself, cooked them himself, watched the men eat until their bellies were round. He stood by the stove with something close to satisfaction on his face. He believed he had saved them. 2 weeks later, 3 men on that ship could barely haul line. Not sick in any recognizable way, not fevered, not bleeding, no rash, no swollen joints, just going. Draining away from the inside, quiet and relentless, like a lamp running low on oil. The cook looked at them and blamed the water, blamed the air, blamed the constitution of men who hadn't been properly hardened by the sea. He did not connect the plate to the decline. He died on that voyage not knowing that he had been the instrument of it. That cook was a good man. He made the only decision that looked right, with the information he had, in the circumstances he faced. And that is exactly why this particular knowledge never made it back to shore. The men who had it died with it. The men who needed it never knew to ask. So hold this. Hold it through everything I'm about to tell you. How does a man with a full belly starve to death at sea? That is not a trick question, not philosophy, not a puzzle for passing the time on a long watch. It is a real, physical thing that happened to real men, on real ships, in real water. I will give you the answer, but not yet. First, you need to understand what the sea is actually doing to a man's body when it does this, because the answer, when it comes, will only mean something if you've walked the path to it. Picture the man, provisions gone or nearly. A long passage, farther from port than he ever expected to be. He looks over the rail, and the sea is not empty. White fish turning in the shallows. A gull settling on the water 20 yards off. A seal hauling out on a shelf of ice. The sea is providing. He feels a loosening in his chest, something close to relief, because there is food here. The lean flesh of the world's oceans, free for the taking. He takes it. What he is taking is protein, lean muscle, stripped by the sea's own economy down to almost nothing but fiber and water. The body can run on protein. It can convert it to fuel, but only up to a point, and at a cost that compounds with every meal. Beyond that point, the body cannot process the waste fast enough. It builds in the blood. The organs begin to labor under it, and the man feels hunger, not ordinary hunger, the simple hollow you fill with a biscuit and forget, but a grinding, relentless, worsening signal that his body is sending him because it is burning itself from the inside out, consuming its own reserves because what he is feeding it cannot meet the need. And here is the cruelty of it. He answers that hunger with more lean meat, more fish, more gull. The hunger worsens. He thinks he is simply not eating enough, so he eats more. Each meal tightens the screw. The more he eats, the worse he feels, and he cannot make sense of it because the plate in front of him is full. But that is not the part that undoes him. The part that undoes him is what he does next, and what he doesn't do. He does not stop and ask what is wrong with what he is eating. He asks how much more he needs. He is looking at the wrong question, and by the time the right question occurs to anyone, he is past answering it. I saw it once with my own eyes on a long Southern Ocean passage. A young foremast hand, strong when we left port, the kind of man you'd point to first when something heavy needed moving. By the third month, with the ship's stores low and the catch running lean, he was the color of old tallow. Not pale in the way sickness makes a man pale, but faded, as if something was being slowly drawn out of him that had nothing to do with blood. He ate more than any other man aboard. He was the first to weaken. The mate said he had no constitution for the sea. The surgeon, if you could call him that, he was a carpenter by trade who'd read half a medical book, bled him twice, which helped nothing and probably hastened things. Nobody on that ship connected the plate to the decline. They were watching how much he ate. Nobody was watching what he ate. Nobody thought to look at what he was not eating and what had been quietly poured off the side as waste. The danger is invisible because the man is eating. A starving man looks like he is not eating. This man looked fed. That is the terrible elegance of it, and it is the reason it killed so many men across so many voyages without anyone ever writing down the true cause. Here is where most men went wrong, and where a handful, by accident or by teaching, went right. The men who came through, the ones who lived off lean catch for weeks and walked back to port on their own legs, were almost always men who, whether they understood the reason or not, kept fat in the meal. Not always much, not always intentionally, but it was there. The old hand who always cracked the bones before the pot and let the marrow run into the broth. The man who saved the oil rendered from a seabird rather than pouring it off and cooked the next meal in it. The one who ate the organs first, liver, kidney, gut fat, the soft fatty tissue around the cavity, before he touched the lean flesh. These were the parts that any well-provisioned, well-fed man would push aside. Too rich, too strong. Too much like the interior of the animal, which a civilized man was supposed to keep at a distance. But these were the parts that carried what lean muscle could not. These were the parts that kept a man's body from turning on itself. The men who died ate clean, lean fish, nothing else. Breast meat of the bird, the skin discarded because it was oily and the oil seemed like excess. Seal muscle with the blubber scraped away, because the blubber was too heavy on the stomach, or because the taste of it turned a man who hadn't been raised on it. They ate until they were full, and they wasted away on a full stomach. This is not my theory. This is documented record, and I want to be careful here, because on this subject, a man's authority comes from being right, not from being specific. The Arctic explorer Vilhjálmur Stefansson, a careful man, methodical, not given to dramatic stories, spent years living as the northern hunters lived, eating what the ice and the cold water gave. He described in terms that leave no room for argument what happened to men who ate lean meat alone when the fat was absent, the hunger that no amount of food could answer, the decline that came on like a wasting sickness, the way the body turned on itself quietly below the surface, while the man continued to eat and could not understand why he was failing. Stefansson didn't just observe it. He tested it on himself and on colleagues under conditions where it could be observed and recorded, and the record stands. Lean alone will kill you. Fat is not the enemy. Fat is the fuel the body needs to make use of what the lean provides. Without it, the protein becomes a burden the body cannot carry. The northern peoples, the Inuit, the hunters who had lived on animal flesh alone for more generations than any European had been keeping records, did not die of this. They ate fat deliberately as the primary food. The lean was the side dish. The marrow, the blubber, the organs, the rendered oil, these were the meal. The lean muscle was what was left over after the important parts were taken. They had learned this in the hardest classroom there is, across generations of winters, and they had kept the lesson because the alternative was what we are talking about. Now hold the riddle I gave you. You are about ready to have it answered. How does a man with a full belly starve to death at sea? He eats the lean and throws away the fat. That is the whole of it. The body needs fat to process protein, to run the organs, to spare the muscle it would otherwise consume as fuel, to carry what the lean flesh offers into something a man can actually use. Without fat, the protein piles up in the blood as waste the body cannot clear. The man eats. His belly is full, and he starves because the thing he is eating cannot keep him alive without the thing he discarded. Now, I want you to sit with this for a moment. A whaling ship at sea carries tripods on deck, great iron kettles mounted above brick furnaces, fired with the stripped scraps of the whale itself, the lean leftovers after the blubber is cut free. The blubber is loaded into those pots and rendered down into oil over hours of hard, hot, stinking labor. The oil is run into barrels. The barrels are stowed below. The oil is the cargo. The oil is the money. The oil is the whole reason the ship left port. The reason the men crossed 10,000 miles of open ocean. The reason a voyage stretched to 2 years and sometimes longer. And the man dying below decks, the man failing on a full stomach of lean fish, lean gull, lean whale muscle, is 50 feet from the richest source of animal fat in the known world. He is dying of the very thing his ship was built to carry. The oil is right there. It is in the barrels. It is in the pots. The fix was always right there, on the same deck where he is weakening, and nobody told him. Nobody connected those two facts. The cargo went to the merchant house in port. The men went to their graves, and the irony rode home in the hold, and nobody wrote it down. That is not a story about bad luck. That is a story about what happens when knowledge dies, when the men who had it don't pass it on, when the ones who needed it never knew to ask, when a thing that could have been spoken in a single sentence on a single afternoon remains unspoken across decades of voyages and hundreds of men. If this is the first time you've heard this, there's more where that came from. The men who knew this, who learned it the way I learned it, the way the older hands learned it before me. They did not write it down because sea knowledge wasn't written. It moved by voice, by example, by proximity. A long voyage, an older man watching a younger one make the mistake, a quiet word afterward. When the voyage ended, the crew scattered. The old hands aged out and went ashore and eventually stopped talking. The ones who remembered went to their graves because nobody thought to sit with them and ask the right questions before they did. And what has taken its place is almost a mirror image of the truth. Today, the lesson that gets sold, and I do mean sold, there is real money behind it, is that lean is clean. That fat is the enemy of a long life, that the virtuous choice, the disciplined choice, the healthy choice is to strip the fat away and eat the muscle. Lean protein as the goal, fat as the thing to minimize or eliminate. That is the exact opposite of what kept men alive when the sea stopped giving them options. The men who made it home from the worst voyages ate the fat first and the lean second. They cracked the bones. They kept the oil. They ate the parts that a well-fed man in a comfortable house would push to the edge of the plate. There is documented support for this, and I want to name it plainly. Stephenson's record of lean meat sickness in the Arctic. The survival literature of the early 20th century, which returned to this question repeatedly. The warning against lean-only diets when survival depends on what you can catch. The knowledge was never secret. It was simply inconvenient, and inconvenient knowledge has a way of getting misplaced, especially when the alternative sells better. So here is what the old hands knew. Here is the system, as plain as I can make it. Fat is the meal. Lean is what is left over after the meal is taken. If you are living off the catch, fish from the rail, a bird from the rigging, whatever the sea sends over the side, you take the fat parts first. The oil, the skin, the blubber, the marrow from the cracked bone. You render what you can render and you cook in it, rather than discarding it. You eat the organs before you touch the muscle, liver, kidney, gut fat, whatever the animal carries inside it that is soft and rich and not lean. These are not the scraps. These are the meal. Oily fish, when the sea gives you the choice, are worth more than lean white fish of 3 times the size. Mackerel, herring, any fish that runs dark and rich, these are closer to what a man's body needs than white cod fished out of cold water. If you have a choice, you take the oily one. And if the hunger worsens the more you eat, if you are filling your belly and still the hunger grinds deeper, stop. Do not eat more of the same thing. You are eating the wrong thing. Find fat. Find it in whatever form the sea or the ice or the rigging offers and eat it before anything else. That is the signal the body sends when it is being asked to do what cannot be done, and the only answer the body will accept is the one that the lean cannot give. There is a word for the kind of man who takes the fat parts first, who eats the organ meat and cracks the bones and keeps the grease for cooking. The word that gets used is something between wasteful and undisciplined. The lean man is the one praised in the story we have been told. The man who takes the choice cut and leaves the rest is the man of virtue and restraint. I've stood over graves. I've helped lower men into the sea in canvas hammocks weighted with round shot, the water closing over them on the wrong side of the world, their families never knowing how they went or what the last weeks were like. And I'll tell you plainly, the graves I've stood over did not belong to the men who ate the fat. They belonged to the ones who were virtuous about it. Virtue at sea wears different clothes than it does in the parlor. What keeps a man breathing is right. What keeps him looking respectable at the dinner table is something else entirely. And out on the open water with provisions gone and the nearest port a month away, nobody at that table is watching anyway. What do you think that cook did wrong? The one who fished the lean cod and fed his crew on it and watched them decline. Was it ignorance? Or was it that the wrong thing looked exactly like the right thing? That the choice that kills and the choice that saves can look identical from the outside? A full plate, a fed crew, a man doing his job? Leave that below. I read every one. Next time, I want to tell you about another thing men trusted at sea that they had no business trusting, and about the particular cruelty of thirst when there is water in every direction as far as the eye can reach. That one took men who were only 3 days from shore, men who made the wrong calculation in the last hour of a long and otherwise survivable ordeal. Until then, mind your fire and never trust a full belly to tell you the truth at sea.